First of all, thank you so much for taking the time to fly in and talk to us today.
Yeah.
Can you just introduce yourself one more time for us?
My name's Quinton Lucas. I'm the mayor of Kansas City, Missouri.
All right. And first things first, how did you like the conference and the panel that you were a part of?
You know, the conference was incredibly interesting. As somebody who spends my days in politics, both in my hometown and nationally, getting a chance to hear voices, particularly black voices, young black voices, is something that we don't get to catch all the time. There are a lot of people who tell us what 2024 will be, but I find often those aren't the people who are organizing. Those aren't the people who are listening in communities. And we have the blessing to have had a conference where we could do that today.
Absolutely. And then going back to your community, are you going to come back with any takeaways from what you heard on the panel?
You know, what I think I heard today was actually more optimism than you might think. There are lots of reasons to be concerned about 2024, trust me.
Yes,
But I think what I'm hearing today are a lot of people who have worked on the front lines in places like Florida, Georgia, Michigan, Indiana, who are saying, yeah, we're committed to making a difference and making sure that our people have a chance to have their voices heard.
Definitely. First things first, local elections, you talked about it a little bit on the panel. Dismally low turnout, even lower when we're talking about black voters as a share of that population of the vote.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask you to solve it right now, but what are some of those things that we can do to start to increase that turnout?
I think it is strategic that we have usually pushed local elections to low turnout races so that you can, in a way, pick your electorate. What we need to do is flip that on its head and to say we want to be more engaged on social media. We want people who've never voted to vote before. We want to actually expand the universe. If you run for office or if you push an issue in office, the first thing they tell you is to try to identify your voters.
Right.
You try to find your electorate.
Find your base.
Right. That's not how we should be doing these sorts of things. What we should be doing is saying, I want every single person in my jurisdiction to be heard. And what I caught from this conference today were ways that people who for too long have been either marginalized, had their votes suppressed. What we said is, if you are a 21-year-old returning citizen who nobody's ever asked for their vote, we want to listen to you. That's the sort of thing that I think can make a difference for local politics. And then ultimately, I think that level of engagement gets us better candidates, builds a better base for state and federal office thereafter.
I'm assuming that you are going to vote for the Democratic presidential nominee in 2024.
I certainly assume so too, unless something real crazy happens.
Right. So then my question based off of that is, Joe Biden does have a litany of accomplishments that he's had.
Yes.
We can talk about the Infrastructure Act, on and on and on and on and on. You go out into the general public, people can't tell you about that. They can tell you about the money going to Ukraine and different things like that that's angering them, but not necessarily some of those accomplishments that most candidates would be able to point to. How do you help bridge that gap and that messaging gap?
I think sometimes there is Washington speak, and sometimes there's like real America speak. And while I'm standing in Washington, D.C. right now, the thing I liked about this conference was that I talked to a whole bunch of folks who are regular people who talk regular issues each and every day. That's what the White House, that's what the president's communication staff on the campaign need to make sure they do. Yeah, people don't know necessarily what the Inflation Reduction Act is or the CHIPS Act or some of these other things. What they do know is cheaper pharmaceuticals. What they do know is the fact that our economy is on much more stable ground than it was in 2020 when President Trump was still in office. And I think you sell those sorts of wins long term rather than necessarily getting too in-depth on, what's the latest news in Washington. The amazing thing that I've seen in politics and political life. I knocked on a door once. I asked a guy, hey, who are you voting for? Vote for this person, that person. He said, Q, which is what they call me, the only thing I care about is the screaming one-year-old baby upstairs. So understanding that the American people, whether you got that screaming one-year-old, you got that knee that's hurting, you got that job that you're worried about, you have some other issue, you got an environment you're worried about. Those are the messages that need to be shared, and I think the president and his team should do an impactful job in making sure that the people know they have an answer for that. Whereas I think on the other side, you're going to see a lot of navel-gazing, for lack of a better term. President Trump's trying to relitigate the last election. Governor DeSantis is trying to relitigate the last election while also kind of saying he's different, but not, right? You have all these other interesting things going on the right. You can talk accomplishments, but you need to actually say how their meat and potatoes changes for people rather than getting too into the technicalities.
There you go. Appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you,
so
sir. I appreciate you.
Have a good one.